We're in Sydney and we're at our first carbon tax rally, renewable energy target, clean energy target, whatever you want. It's nothing but a carbon tax. Have a listen. Now in Parliament, I have started every speech bar one with the words, "As a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia." And the one speech I missed, I said it at the end. And there is a reason for starting every speech with that. And that is because that is exactly what every member of Parliament is. A servant to the people of Queensland or people of New South Wales or the people of South Australia and to the people of Australia. The government is here to serve the people. It is being transformed so that the people are now serving the government. We have to reverse that. And that's what we're trying to do with One Nation. What I want to do is just go through some basic facts with you as an illustration of how these processes are destroying our country. The basic facts start with climate data. The thing that decides policy, or good policy, is hard data. Physical observations, measured data. And what that data shows is that when it comes to temperature, the last 22 years have seen no increase in temperature. There has been no warming whatsoever. And that's despite record quantities of carbon dioxide from human activity. Number two, the longest temperature trend in the whole of the last 120 years was 40 years from 1930s to 1976. 40 years of a temperature trend while increasing human production of carbon dioxide in the Second World War and the post-war economic boom. And what was that trend? Cooling. It was 40 years of cooling. The 1930s were warmer in America than today. In Australia, the 1880s and the 1890s were warmer than today. 1,000 years ago, it was much warmer than today. These are facts. There is no warming going on. The very first thing that I did when I was sworn in as a senator was to leave the chamber and go and write a letter to the CSIRO requesting them to make a presentation to me on why they reckon that we have to do something about carbon dioxide. And to cut a long story short, by the time we chased them and they eventually came and met with us in Sydney, they gave us a 2.5-hour presentation. There is no evidence anywhere in that presentation of we affecting the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or affecting the temperature. None at all. We are not responsible for climate change. And in fact, there's no climate change occurring. It's just natural cyclical variation. So then we gave them a rebuttal, which they didn't answer. And then I presented my response to them to a Senate committee. And the CSIRO then saw fit to answer with kids stuff. It was a 2.5-page document, not referenced, just kids stuff. This is our CSIRO. And pursuing them in Senate estimates on your behalf led to then another presentation from the chief scientist. And he admitted that he's not an expert on science, on climate. He also admitted he doesn't understand the climate debate. And so he hasn't met with us since. But the CSIRO has met again. And we asked them to give us any evidence that shows that that there's something unprecedented happening in our climate. And they made that presentation on 10th, just a couple of weeks ago, and there is nothing. We rebutted that. We showed, well, we'll tell you more about that in coming weeks because we've got a few more things to do with them. But there is nothing happening with the climate and certainly nothing that we are causing globally. Nothing at all. The science shows that. And what I want to do is take you back to the start of this scam. That's what it is. And I want to acknowledge Craig Kelly. It takes a lot of guts to stand up here and go against his own party. Now, he couldn't come out strongly against it, but he certainly, just by speaking here, he shows that he's questioning because he knows and we know that he opposed the carbon tax because it's just nonsense. So let's go back to 2007 and a man we all know, Kevin Rudd. Kevin Rudd. Kevin Rudd told us about the greatest moral challenge of our lifetime. And Kevin Rudd was full of it because there was no evidence ever presented. Think about that. When they talk about it, they never talk about the data. They talk about the consensus. Do you know that the 97% consensus of scientists who claim this is happening? When you boil down the figures, it's actually, I think your battery's out, I think it's actually 0.3 of 1%. 0.3, and none of them have any evidence. So what happened with Kevin Rudd is that he got a big jump in the polls, a huge jump in the polls. So what did John Howard do as Prime Minister? Did he come back with the data which showed that Rudd was wrong? No, he didn't. In his weakness, what did John do, Havel? He endorsed it. And he said he would lead the party that would put in place the first emissions trading scheme. It wasn't Rudd that brought in the first emissions trading scheme as a policy. It was John Howard, a Liberal, who brought in the first carbon tax as a policy. That is fact. The second thing John did, in contrary to the evidence, was he brought in a renewable energy target. It's really an intermittent energy target, not a renewable. But he brought that in. And just last month, the same man was telling us that it's gone crazy. His 2% is now 23%. The Liberal Party did that. And then the third thing he did, the speaker before me, who I have the utmost respect for, John Howard wanted to comply with the Kyoto Protocol. He said he would never do, he'd never sign the Kyoto Protocol, but he said we would comply with it. And he had a choice. Either deindustrialise, which we wouldn't cop, or stop the clearing of land that farmers bought. And what did he do? He colluded with Peter Beattie up north in Queensland and Bob Carr in this state as Environment Minister, and he stole farmers' property rights. Now, for anybody who was in the Liberal Party, is there anything more sacrosanct to a true Liberal than stealing of property rights? There is nothing. But he did it. So he stole farmers' property rights, because when you stop the clearing of land, what that means is we could comply with the Kyoto Protocol. So he stole this man's property, and thousands of farmers. Peter Beattie pushed through native vegetation protection legislation for that reason. We have now got farmers facing criminal penalties if they clear land in Queensland. Criminal penalties. That's what our country has come to. Food is basic. And yet this man nearly died trying to get his land back and didn't succeed. He's still going through the courts. So what we see then is the destruction of our industrial base, now with amongst the highest prices, thank you, in the world, the highest electricity prices. And yet we have some of the best and cleanest coal in the world. Coal is by far the cheapest source of electricity other than hydro. But think about this as a little excursion. Look around all these buildings. Look around the clothes you're wearing. Every single thing you can see was touched by coal. Half of it through the electricity generated and the other half through the production of steel. They're not talking about steel. Why? Because they can't replace the coal that goes into steel. It's fundamental. They're only talking about the electricity. This is deceit. Be very, very clear. This is deceit. Now let's remember that in 2011, 4 years after he was booted out of office, John Howard was invited by the Global Warming Policy Foundation, one of the world's leading skeptic organisations, skeptical about us causing global warming. And do you know what he said in the annual lecture? He said that he is agnostic on climate change. In other words, he hasn't made up his mind, and he has now put in place a renewable energy target. He put in policy the first emissions trading scheme, which Tony Abbott got rid of as policy. So we are being shafted by a Labor Party and Greens coalition collusion nonsense. That is fraud. The people who perpetrated it were Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, Penny Wong, Peter Garrett, Greg Combet. Let me tell you something about Greg Combet. Greg Combet, before he got parachuted into a very safe seat up here in New South Wales, was in Victoria being the head of the ACTU. He was a director on an industry superannuation fund. He resigned that directorship and then got parachuted into the seat of Charlton. He quickly became minister, put in place a carbon tax, and was responsible for shoveling tens of millions of dollars to wind farm owners that were owned by the same fund that he directed. He was feeding money into the coffers of the union movement from your wallets, your bank accounts, based upon the intermittent energies and the renewable energy target. That is what is happening in our country. And when you think about it even more, the Greens have been pushing this very, very strongly. So what's happening is that our industry is shutting down and exporting jobs overseas. They use our coal to generate electricity, and they sell it for a lower price than we sell it here because of the renewable energy target and the other subsidies to the renewable energies. They are now doing us out of our jobs right across all sectors, including agriculture. And think about this, our clean coal, burned in their dirty old power stations without the pollution scrubbing equipment, means that they are increasing the pollutions, real pollutants, sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides and particulates. Our coal, when burned in our clean power stations, produces none of that. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant. It is essential for all life on this planet. And ironically for the Greens, everything green depends upon carbon dioxide. If we could control the level of carbon dioxide, and we can't, if we could control it, we would increase it because it's highly beneficial for life. And by the way, speaking of carbon dioxide levels, in 2009, because of the recession after the global financial crisis, the human production of carbon dioxide in 2009 was lower than in 2008. What happened to the level in the atmosphere? It increased. Why? Because we can't affect it. The oceans contain in dissolved form more than 50 times the carbon dioxide in the entire atmosphere. And that is controlled entirely by temperature. Every year as the temperature changes in the southern hemisphere, seasonally, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere follows it. We have no impact, and we can have no impact on that because it depends on the temperature. So they're telling us it's warming unusually. It's not. They're telling us it's caused by the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's not. It's the reverse. And they're telling us that that level is caused by us. It's not. We are not affecting it at all. And the fourth point, scientifically, is that every previous warming on this planet is referred to as, by scientists as a climate optimum. Why? Because warmer temperatures are beneficial for humans, civilization, plants and animals. If we could change the temperature, we would raise it. If we could change the level of carbon dioxide, we would increase it. But we can't affect either. They are taxing us for one simple reason. They are taxing us because they want to control our energy. Peter correctly pointed out that they're controlling our water. I visited the Balonne Shire Council in southern Queensland and learned about what was happening with our Murray-Darling Basin, again, based on false science. We asked them, and they're being devastated in southern Queensland by this Murray-Darling Basin, based on false science. And we asked them, what percentage of your Balonne Shire Council revenue comes from the federal government? What do you reckon? 73%. Almost 3/4 of their funding comes from the government, and it comes with strings attached. So who's running the local councils? Federal government. Who's running the state governments? Because more than 50% of state government expenditure comes from the federal government with strings attached. Who's running this country? The federal government. And the Constitution says it should be going back to the states. Now, another point to mention is that the UN started this climate scam. The UN did this. Maurice Strong admitted, as the head of the United Nations United Nations Environmental Program, he admitted that he had two main aims. One was the emplacement of a global unelected socialist governance. And the other one was to deindustrialize Western civilization. Can you see what's happening? It is really simple. These are by their own words. Christine Figueres, the head of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has admitted that it's a socialist agenda to get control of a new world order. Her words, not mine. This is all out in the open. So what I want to make very clear is that this is an agenda being pushed by both people in a small group of people in the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, and the Greens. And the Greens have sworn themselves to an unelected socialist global governance. The Labor Party has also said, some leaders of the Labor Party have said the same thing. So what I want to make it very clear is that we're in this mess because of weakness in the Liberal Party. But we're in this mess because of dishonesty, deceit, and betrayal in the Labor Party and the Greens. Make no mistake, they are the ones we need to hold accountable for this mess to our country. And what I'm also saying is that we need to be very clear that this is not just about destroying our economy with a carbon tax, a renewable energy target, subsidies that taxpayers and electricity users pay for. It is about unelected socialist global governance. The words are out there, they're not new to me. I want to make it something else very clear too. We have David Adler here, proud member of the Jewish community, and his wife, his lovely wife. I want to be very, very clear. There is only one democracy in the Middle East, and that is Israel. And we need to stand up and support Israel, and we need to stand up and support the Jewish community in this country. We must not have anti-Semitism in this country, and the Greens are pushing anti-Semitism. Let's finish on one thing. The Greens, we've shown, are anti-science. They think that the way to overturn all the science is to claim that a picture of a cute turtle or a dolphin or a koala bear is a substitute for science. It's not. The second thing the Greens are is anti-environment. When you send the production of electricity and jobs overseas and old power stations that are producing real pollutants, you are increasing the level of real pollution around the world. The Greens are causing that. The other thing is, and this is very, very important, in the Industrial Revolution we started to see the decrease of energy prices. When energy prices decrease, it leads to an increase in productivity. When productivity increases, what happens? Prosperity increases. When prosperity increases, what happens? We can afford to protect the environment. Do you know that in 1826, just a few blocks from here, Sydney celebrated the opening of Australia's first street lamp network? Do you know what powered those street lamps? Whale oil. And that was the same in Britain and Europe. Coal has since replaced whale oil as the source of our electricity for lighting. Thanks to coal, the whales are now secure. Think about something else. How did people do their cooking, their heating 120, 30 years ago? They did it with timber coming from the forests. As a result of coal, we now have 30% more area in forests in all the major developed continents on this planet, thanks to coal. Now, I'm not an advocate of coal, but I am an advocate for the cheapest form of energy that is cheap, reliable, secure, synchronous, and environmentally responsible. Coal is environmentally responsible, as is hydro energy. Hydro is actually the cheapest, but the Greens won't let the Liberals build any dams. We're here to stop that. We will be advocating the building of dams, fundamental to state government policy in Queensland. Murray-Darling Basin, we could simply solve that problem by telling the truth in South Australia, by putting that back to nature, by building dams on some of the tributaries of the Clarence River, sending the water west, and doing the same in Queensland. Nothing in this country is insoluble. The main problems in this country have been caused by humans. The most dangerous building in this country is Australia's Federal Parliament House. I can say that truthfully and sincerely because I'm now part of that and we're trying to undo things. The most dangerous political force in this country is the Australian Greens. I started off by saying they're anti-science, anti-environment, anti-industry, anti-development, anti-civilization. They are pro-Islam and therefore anti-female. They are anti-women. They are also pro-Islam, therefore they are anti-homosexual. They are anti-children, anti-family. They are nothing short of anti-human. The Greens are the worst form of political force in this country. The third thing I just want to touch on briefly, the third thing I want to mention is that in this country right now, the most destructive issue we have is taxation. It is just a hodgepodge, a mishmash, a mess of 70 years of various people interfering with it. Why do we tax payroll? Well, everyone knows that when you tax something, you decrease its use. Why would you want to decrease payroll? When you tax something, you decrease its use. We tax PAYE income, which increases the cost of employment for employers. It doesn't make sense. Do you realise that a person on the average income in this country gets up in the morning, she gets up and says, I'm going to save some money so I'll make my sandwiches. That loaf of bread is taxed, 50% of the price of that loaf of bread is taxed, which means that it's a tax rate of 100% on bread, your food. She then steps out of her house to get into a car, and she leaves her home, and the typical home these days is around about 85%, it's almost 40%, almost half the price is tax. It works out to an effective tax rate of 85% on a house. Then she jumps in a car and stops at the fuel station on her way to work, and she finds that she has to fill up, and about 70% of the price of fuel is tax. That's a tax rate of 230%. And you're wondering why we can't get jobs going. The government, and I'm talking about the Liberal and Labor Party, need to get together. That's why we are here. People realise we speak up. Pauline Hanson stands for honesty, transparency, accountability. We'll be giving you much more of that. Stay tuned. We'll be chasing the CSIRO. We'll be exposing that. We'll be exposing that completely. But above all, I want to echo the words of Craig Kelly and Jim Sternhill. Stay involved if you're involved in politics. Thank you very much for coming. If you're not involved, get involved. Speak up. Tell your friends, because we have got to switch back on governance in this country so that it serves the people of this country. I am a servant to the people of Queensland and Australia, and I thank you very much for your service to our country, Australia. Thank you.